the Mets. Step right up and greet the Mets. Bring your kiddies, bring your wife. Guaranteed to have the time of your life, because the Mets are really socking the ball, knocking those home runs over the wall. East side, west side, everybody's coming down to meet the METS Mets of New York town. Oh, the butcher and the baker and the people on the streets, where do they go? To meet the Mets! Oh, they're hollering and cheering and they're jumping in their seats. Where do they go? To meet the Mets! All the fans are true to the orange and blue, so hurry up and come on down, 'cause we got ourselves a ball club, the Mets of New York town. Give 'em a yell! Give 'em a hand! And let 'em know you're rooting in the stand. The Mets, meet the Mets. Step right up and greet the Mets. Bring your kiddies, bring your wife. Guaranteed to have the time of your life, because the Mets are really socking the ball, knocking those home runs over the wall. East side, west side, everybody's coming down to meet the METS Mets of New York town, of New York town.
How's it going, Mets and baseball fans? Thank you guys all so much for chiming back into a new live stream here on WardyNYM. It's been right around a week or maybe a day over a week. I'm not sure, but I know we haven't done a live stream in a little bit now. I know we will be doing one hopefully early next week once we get an answer on the managerial process. But we have a lot to get into in tonight's live stream, a special live stream as well, because we're breaking down all the latest news and reports, rumors, I should say, regarding the New York Mets. There has been some rumblings going around and really just a lot of talk still, even with things being dead quiet overall with actually making transactions at the MLB level, given the MLB lockout. So we'll be getting into all the latest on the managerial search. I didn't even think I would be talking about it again until we had a hire in place, but here we are today, folks. So if you're watching this live or on replay, make sure to smash that like and subscribe on as always, and we will, of course, be breaking down all the latest on the rumor front regarding potential signings or trade targets for the Mets outside of what we've already talked about on the channel, because some things have come up over the past 24 to 48 hours. And we're also going to be joined by a special guest shortly into the live stream, probably around 20 minutes or so. That being a good friend, Pat Ragazzo, as many of you know, covers the New York Mets, does a great job through an affiliate with Sports Illustrated. So he'll be coming on. We'll be getting to know him a bit, and he'll be sharing his further thoughts on everything regarding the Mets, the MLB, the lockout overall, and so much more. So big episode, big show, I should say, tonight. And I want to thank everyone so much for first chiming in. I see Ricky, Joseph, Ashford, Thomas, great member on the channel. Mama Worm, how are you today? Let's go down the list further. Legendary Watermelon, D, Steven, Dave, great friend and subscriber on the channel. Jose, Urena, D, Andre, Andrew, Joe, Miguel, Aaron. Let's go down further. Ariel, thank you so much for being here. Buzz Talk Live, how's it going? John, Felix Jimenez, great member on the channel. I am anxious. How's it going, everybody? If you're just chiming in now on the live stream, thank you so much for being here. Help us get to 100 likes for the first short-term goal here in the stream. And we're just going to dive in, folks, whether you're watching this live or on replay. I'm sure it'll hold true for a bit. So, like I said, plenty to discuss in today's segment. And we'll also be doing quite the Q&A towards the end of the live stream as well, along with in between. Ali, my great friend, how are you? Thank you so much for being here. Miguel, Miles, Steven, Heim, how's it going? Again, appreciate everyone first chiming in, folks. Really, really means a lot, guys. Sima, Kish, great member on the channel. Dominic, great member, great friend. But guys, let's get into it. Okay. As we know, a lot's been transpiring first and foremost regarding the managerial search. As we know, we are down to 3 final candidates that are getting second interviews. One of those interviews has already transpired. And I think the second interview is either has transpired or is transpiring shortly or right around as we're talking right now, because I know that Steve Cohen wasn't going to have them until the evening once he was done with his day job, you know, the reason why he's a multi-billionaire. But as we know, those 3 are Matt Catrero, the bench coach for the Tampa Bay Rays, Joe Espada, the bench coach for the Houston Astros, and yes, Buck Showalter, the man without a position in the MLB currently besides MLB Network, but of course the most experienced man. It's not even close. So Mets already did their second interview with Matt Quatraro Tuesday, which went really well, according to reports from John Heyman today. Said that he really left a great impression, apparently, and that this search maybe isn't going to be as clear cut as a lot of fans and the media made it out to be. Again, I'm going to be more than satisfied with whoever's hired here. I know a lot of people are very stern on one stance over the other, so I'm going to share my further thoughts on that in a minute here. But outside of that, we have Joe Espada, whose interview is today at the time of recording this, that being Thursday, December 16th. Then tomorrow, to cap off the week before we hit the weekend, it is Buck Showalter getting his second interview. A couple things to note about this interview process in case you guys aren't aware, haven't been following along. Again, shout out all you guys for chiming in the live stream. Make sure to smash that like and subscribe button if you're enjoying the stream as always, folks. But a couple things to talk about first is Steve Cohen. The interviews are happening at his house. I love that. I love the personal kind of connection that the Cohens, and not just Steve, but also his wife, have done throughout every interview process, not just regarding front office hires, but also in trying to draw free agents. Mark Canha made it very known. Max Scherzer made it very known how involved the Cohens were as a family and really drawing people into the organization. I love that. So I really appreciate the fact that it's at his house. I think that's pretty cool. And I also like the fact that, of course, Billy Epler and Sandy Alderson are there as well. But Steve Cohen, the second interview is really honing in regarding him. And there's one thing that we all know by now. It's the fact that Steve Cohen, to this point, still has plenty say, plenty pull on all the decisions that are happening with the Mets. Now, all reports have indicated that Billy Epler is the man to make the final decision in this managerial search. So it could have maybe a little bit of a different impact than, say, Steve's preferring. Because as we know, as we talked about in previous live streams and videos, Steve Cohen, reports have indicated that he would like Buck Showalter. That's his guy. Let's see if those reports hold true or not. Max Scherzer has made it known that he would prefer Buck Showalter. We've seen a report earlier today, that being from Mark Healy, who covers the New York Mets as well. He said that he's heard some rumblings in his, and again, I don't know how true this is. He's just reiterating what he has heard. But that Sandy Alderson prefers Matt Quatraro from the Tampa Bay Rays. But even though that all these insights from people from the owner to Sandy are normally important, if this is Billy's decision at the end of the day, it's really not going to mean all that much, or at least it shouldn't. They're going to give their fair share of say, but they're letting Billy ride this one out. He's going to pick whoever he feels is best for the position. And I know a lot of fans are either going to love it. I know a lot of fans are either going to hate it. A lot of fans are going to fit in between. But one thing that I want to make abundantly clear, folks, before we really go further here in the live stream, and before we get Pat Ragazzo in this one for a little bit, that's going to be breaking down a lot further on this with us, is the fact that I see a lot of Mets fans day in and day out that are so closed-minded throughout this entire hiring process. It feels so similar to a certain extent with the front office search, with being, thinking, it was Theo Epstein or bust, thinking it was Billy or bust, or, other routes. And I think Billy Epler is truly a prime example of not really viewing everything as doom and gloom, that the sky's falling, right? That the Mets don't make the hire that you were either preferring or hoping for. So I know that there's been a vast majority that I've seen in endless polls on Twitter, on every social media imaginable, that would prefer Buck Showalter. I've seen polls also that indicate that people would like a Joe Espada, Matt Quatraro. Regardless on who the Mets hire, it is oodles amount important. I know that doesn't even make sense what I said, but that whoever they hire, we accept with open arms. People are saying, no, there's only one right choice. It's only Buck. Well, I'm here to tell you, no, there's more than one right choice. And that's the reason why they have 3 candidates that are all beyond qualified. And no, this isn't a situation like a Louis Rojas or a Mickey Callaway. I can't explain that enough. We've broken down each of these candidates thoroughly on the channel and previous live streams and videos. I understand there's always going to be that notion with being against a quote unquote first-time manager, but to put them in the same class as previous first-time managers is awfully foolish considering their backgrounds are drastically different, especially someone like Joe Espada. So I'm telling you guys right now, to help not set up yourself for disappointment, regardless on who you're in favor of, that if the Mets do end up going a different route than what you were assuming, or even what the media was making you believe so far, please do yourself a favor and be open-minded. The same way that I know a lot of people were closed-minded about the Billy Epler hire, and the man has basically done more throughout his literally a month or so as a GM with the New York Mets than he did throughout 4+ years with the LA Angels. So clearly there's more to this than, say, just previous previous experience, and there's reasons as to why the Mets are evaluating all these people and why there are drastic differences in the three. I know that Buck has drastic differences to a further extent than the Cotreros and the Espadas of the world, but the point I'm just trying to make again is it's so easy for us as fans to get wrapped up on a certain candidate for the managerial position or a certain player that we would love through trade or free agency, when in reality, the Mets have a process. They have a mindset. They have a vision. Trust the process, if you will, right? That is what I'm going to be trying my best to instill and fellow Mets fans, so that way that they don't feel that they're not even giving the proper hire, I shouldn't even say proper hire, but they aren't even giving the hire, a proper, fair playing field. At least feel them out a little bit. Let's see what they're going to do, regardless on if it's Buck, Espada, or Cotrero. So that's my little TED Talk. I've been ranting about it for a bit. It genuinely bothers me. I know that this is Mets fandom. We go through this. We're always going to go through this. I love Mets fans more than anything, but we're also so close-minded with things. And I really think at the end of the day, the Mets are going to do what they feel is best for the organization. And whatever they feel is best for the organization is what I am going to support them with until proven otherwise. If it works out, awesome. Then that means that what they're doing is right. And if it doesn't work out, then okay, then maybe this is something that they can look back on and say, hey, we made the wrong move. But only time is going to tell, regardless on who is going to exactly come in as a hire. But I'm going to get into plenty more here on the managerial stuff shortly. I do just want to shout out everyone again that's first chiming in the live stream. We'll be breaking down a lot on news, rumors, especially regarding the Kris Bryant front, some potential other player targets that we've talked about on the channel, maybe some that we haven't already, once we get Pat Ragazzo, the Mets beat reporter, in here. But I do see a $20 donation from Pat Mets. Pat Mets, thank you so much for the $20 donation. Really appreciate that, my friend. These are all really good choices. If Showalter doesn't get the job, do not get upset. For the first time, there really is no bad choice out of the three. If it has to be the best baseball person, not the best personality. Preaching the choir, Pat Mets. I'm glad we're on the same page. Thank you so much for that donation. Always appreciate the donations and the support from all you guys. And again, help us get to 100 likes for the first short-term goal. We're trying to get to 200 to 300 by the end of the stream. Always appreciate, folks. But yeah, exactly. Just reiterating what I've already said. Shout out Chris, shout out Ethan, shout out everybody for chiming in. Shout out Ballcap Sports as well. You have to ride with whoever they choose, but Buck or Espada would be best. See, that everyone has their opinion. I have nothing against Matt Cotrero at all. I will be just as excited about if Matt Cotrero became manager as I would Buck Showalter. If there's one person that I might be a little bit more excited than anyone else, for me personally, it's Joe Espada, only because Espada has deeper resume as an MLB coach than Cotrero, and also has been deemed as that next man up to be a very strong manager in the league. Something that Cotrero, who even though he's deemed similar, hasn't had the same level of background to this point as Espada has. And Espada, unlike Cotrero, has dealt with the big market, the New York market, during his time with the Yankees as an infield coach, third base coach, and assistant to Brian Cashman, special assistant Brian Cashman. So overall, I really like all three, but for very different reasons, and I'm going to support whatever they do. But shout out Ballcap Sports. We love Jim in here. Hope you're doing well, my man. Wishing you continued success on everything that you've been doing on the channel. Great stuff as always. But guys, I want to know everyone's initial thoughts here right now regarding the managerial search. Right now, at this point in time, who is your favorite candidate? Do you think that Buck Showalter still your guy? Is Joe Espada your guy? Is Matt Cotrero your guy? Whatever it is, let me know. And Germ, thank you so much for the kind words. I appreciate that. Appreciate everyone first chiming in, folks. If you're watching the live stream live, really appreciate you guys. I'm not sold on inexperienced managers. And I'm not trying to do a sell job here. I think the point I'm trying to make is to be optimistic, regardless of the route the Mets go down. That's the big thing for me, okay? We can all have our fair share of opinions, and we can have our doubts. Can't deny you whatsoever on that front. But regardless on who they bring in, nothing changes until we see some action with them, right? And how they approach the clubhouse. So we could sit here, whine and grime all throughout the lockout after the hire's made. Say you didn't like the hire, but you whining, you being upset changes nothing at the end of the day. The only way for you to really put yourself in a position to, potentially have yourself looking back and saying, okay, I wasn't wrong in the end, was by being optimistic. I don't think there's any good on being against any of the routes the Mets are going down here, because so far they've had a slam dunk offseason. Now let's put some faith, let's put some trust in their hiring process here, and let's have some faith and Billy Upper too. So far, so good. Let's continue the roll, and let's see what happens after that hire. the rest of the coaching staff would be hired. Some more front office moves could be had. I know that they just hired a minor league pitching coach, that being from the Texas Rangers, who has a decent resume as well, 32-year-old. And Mr. Arnold, I'm trying to remember what his first name is. I think he goes by Jono Arnold. I'm almost certain. Yeah. But yeah, they've been making some decent moves minor league wise, and they're going to continue to overall throughout the offseason. Let's see here. I want Buck, but would be happy with Espada and Cotrero. See, okay, that I like to see that. Again, I understand everyone's opinion. I'm trying to prevent Mets fans from really just being so committed to something and for themselves to get hurt, and themselves be fooled as if it was always going to be this one person. Buck has been the favorite, and he is still the favorite from everything we've seen. But it suggests that means that Espada and Cotrero simply don't have a chance is downright foolish. If that was the case, they would have hired Buck already, and they wouldn't have had Cotrero and Espada in the second interviews. And there's a reason why both Cotrero and Espada are have been interviewed already for the Oakland A's position. So either way, looks like one of those guys is going to be a manager in the MLB next season. We just don't know if it's going to be with the Mets or the A's, right? So there's reasons why these guys are coveted, and there's reasons why the Mets view so highly of them. I'm sure the Mets would love to bring one, if not both, on board in different coaching positions if they were to hire Buck. By the end of the day, there's a reason why they're trying to be manager. They're both in the position to be one as a bench coach who have respectively had great success with great organizations. And again, we'll see what happens. But I just don't want people to be upset in the end when it could have been avoided if they just stayed optimistic, if they really deep dive all the potential that there is with everyone. Regardless on if you feel confident about it or not, there's reason as to why there's optimism here. And I think that's something that needs to be reaffirmed to Mets fans that have this stance of, oh, it's only this way. It cannot be this route. It can only be this route. No, my friend, it can very much be the other route. And I assure you, if that's a route that they will go down, there's plenty of reasons to be excited. But also, if the Mets, Matt Cotrero is a lot different because they have a lot more MLB level background between Cotrero and Espada. Who would be better? I don't know who would be better. I think the Mets are trying to weigh right now who would be better. And we're basing things on experience alone between the two would be Espada. And because he has big market experience, Cotrero doesn't. He was worked for two very small market teams in Cleveland and Tampa. So if we're basing things on experience alone, you go with Espada between the two. But again, that doesn't mean that Cotrero isn't potentially better. We don't know. No one's going to know until a decision is made. If by any chance Espada or Cotrero would be enticed to a lateral move, see, that's what I don't think that'll happen. I would love it. I would lose my mind with joy if the Mets could somehow pull off a scenario where, say, they do hire Buck Showalter, but that they also are somehow, some way able to bring in a Cotrero or a Espada as a lateral move. But the obvious reasons as to why that won't happen are the fact that these guys are trying to be managers. All right. Could they be enticed to potentially be the bench coach for the Mets? Maybe, but I'd say the likelihood in that is as slim to none as possible. Same way that we saw with Mets with their front office search. Trying to get people on a lateral move is so difficult, not just because they need to try to get permission as it is from the owners of those teams, but also that naturally lateral move doesn't mean that they want to move. A good example could be someone like, pardon me, multiple examples that we've seen in the front office search. So I would love it, but I would not expect it to happen. I would be so beyond surprised if the Mets could get a lateral move as one of those bench coaches coming in as bench coach. And that's my opinion. I think that's going to hold true in the end until proven otherwise. Very excited, interested in the impact I can make in the baseball community. Awesome, buddy. Let's see. Dave, thank you so much for the $5 donation, Dave. I really appreciate that. I like the younger guys, but I'd be happy for whoever they choose. Yes, I agree with that one too, Dave. Appreciate the donation a lot. Hype in the chat for Dave. He's a great friend and great support on the channel. Always has been. We all love Dave here. And again, shout out all you guys in the chat. We're 20 likes away from 100 already, folks. Thank you so much for that. Continue smashing that like and subscribe button if you are enjoying the live stream. As always, everybody. But yeah, that's really all I kind of want to initially say in regards to the managerial search from my stance. But now we're going to get our friend and Pat Ragazzo in, and we're going to hear a lot from him on the managerial search and so much more, along with really how he got in the position that he is today. Let's see. What is my second interview, Wardy? It's on Saturday. Yeah, it hasn't been announced yet, but we'll keep it between us. My interview's on Saturday. They say everyone's been saying save the best for last. Everyone's thinking that Showalter's the last interview. Little do they know I'm going to be at Cohen's house on the weekend. But yeah, I mean, we'll see. We'll see. First interview went great. It didn't even last 3 hours like everyone else. 5 hours, I should say. Only lasted, an hour tops. They were pretty sold right from the get-go, and I don't blame them. All jokes aside, though, just looking at for everyone else's comments here before we continue going here in the live stream. We have a lot to touch on. I have a lot to touch on in regards to the rumor mill. I would love to answer a lot of questions too. Ripping heaters with Diesel Wardy. But a lateral move for Cotrero would be to get the experience in a big market area if that's what he wants. Keep that in mind, Miles. If that's something that he's interested in, then okay. But Cotrero has Oakland A's manager written all over him for basing things on his small market experience, analytically driven. I could definitely see Cotrero as the next manager of the Oakland A's if it isn't going to be the Mets. I definitely wouldn't be against that, John. Game Buck and KB. That would be pretty sick. Let's see. Did I hear Correa turned down 10 years, $275 million, and that's why Tiger shifted bias? I did not hear that. I missed that report. But to say I'm surprised that Correa turned down anything less than $300 million, no. That man is trying to get paid far more than anyone else. If you look at that Corey Seager contract, you can expect him to get more than that. At least that's what he's hoping for. Edwin, thank you so much for the $5 donation, my friend. You're a true Mets legend. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. The buck stops here. Showalter, new manager. He's the favorite. I will say that he's the favorite, and I will welcome Buck with open arms like anyone else. And this is coming from the same guy that was by no means a favorite Buck Showalter when the rumblings started with him. A lot on my perspective has changed since that time. Naturally, when you become more informed on things, you can have either a change in stance or just a more reaffirmed belief on something that further backs what you originally believed. But there were some things that I felt about Buck that actually became more of a fallacy, or just, being more open-minded about the situation. So I would like to look at myself as a prime example of someone who, even though Buck wasn't never my first favorite to begin with, by no means am I going to complain if he comes. I'm not going to complain with whoever the Mets hired. Even if Buck wasn't in this scenario, even if it was a Brad Ausmus still here, even if it was a Bob Guerin, anyone, whoever it may be, even a Carlos Beltran, I would have my concerns with the lack of experience. But my point I'm trying to make is I am trusting the Mets process and what they're doing right now, because they've had an offseason make us believe that we should have some confidence. Okay, I've never seen the Mets have an offseason the way that they have thus far, just addressing the roster. Now let's see what they do in these hires, but I'm putting my faith in them and hoping that I don't get hurt that much. But again, we are Mets fans, so who know exactly how hurt or not hurt we're going to get. Ali, thank you so much for the $1 donation, my friend. I hope you're doing well. It's been great interacting with you. Thank you for that. Thomas, I put you onto so much that changed your mind. Thomas, the only thing that you put me onto that I didn't enjoy was the documentary, the Buck Showalter documentary. I'm not sure if you guys have seen it, but if you haven't, make sure to check it out. It's a great one on YouTube. How's it going, Elliot? Shout out to you. Thank you so much for chiming in. Will David Wright be on the Mets coaching staff? No. Beyond doubtful. No, I don't see that happening. I don't see a David Wright or a Curtis Granderson in the Mets coaching staff in 2022, and neither should you. But hey, if it happens, then I'm proven wrong. But I don't think the Mets are going to go down any routes for the coaching staff with people that don't have any coaching experience. I just don't see how. That's exactly why, Carlos Beltran wasn't even in the first round of interviews, right? I have heard of that. I have heard about that regarding Hargrove. Yes. But with that being said, folks, we're going to transition. We're going to get Pat Ragazzo in here. We're going to break down a lot further on what we're currently discussing. Just give me 1 second, everybody. Let's see. Okay, let's see. Okay, I think we're good. I just wanted that in the middle so that way people understood like the talking points of what's still going on. Let's see. Pat, you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Awesome. How's it going, my man?
It's going well. Going well. Hope all is well in your corner. And even though we're in a lockout, got some things going on with the Mets to talk about.
Yeah, we do. So again, everyone chat at Pat Ragazzo. Wish him, say hello to him in the live stream here, folks. If you guys don't know him, he's been doing a great job on the beat for the Mets. How long have you been doing it now? Because I know that you've been new in the Mets beat game.
Right. Yeah. So I joined June 3rd and launched my site for Sports Illustrated and Fan Nation Inside the Mets back in June. But I've been previously was covering the Mets from a part-time standpoint, contributing to Metsmerized online, which I know yourself and many Mets fans are familiar with. And I'm a local kid, grew up in New Jersey in the suburbs, and now in Hoboken, New Jersey. So I've been following the Mets for a number of years. So new to the beat, but definitely not new to the team.
That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, I think what I appreciate most about writers, reporters for the Mets, especially, and like what any fan, team that I'm a fan of, is that you have your reporters that are reporters, but they aren't fans of the team. And I know that's good to not have those biases at times, but I also appreciate the passion for reporters that are also diehard fans. So I really appreciate about yourself. Same thing with like my friend Joe DeMeo. He's the same exact way. He's always been a diehard Mets fan. So how has, I guess my next question for you before we get into everything, because I want people to understand where you're coming from, because you have literally been killing it in a very short period of time. I know that you were huge getting that report out that we talked about on the channel. I've referenced you numerous times now, but the most recent one was regarding the Max Scherzer news. That, of course, Scherzer views Buck Showalter as like his preference for the managerial hire. I know that you were just on Boomer and Geo. Was that just this past week, right?
Yeah, on Thursday.
So how surreal has everything been for you? Growing up a dire Mets fan. Yes, you've been a contributor with Mets Prize and everything, but and now beyond the beat to the point of you're getting that last question in when it was the Scherzer presser and all the other players. So what has been, I guess, your wave of emotions and just realization over the past half year with how everything has transpired for you?
Well, that's a good question. And I've just been trying to soak it up as much as possible and be grateful that I'm doing something that kind of hits close to home. And, I'm very fortunate to be able to cover the Mets, not only being in the biggest market in the world, but, being one of the most valuable franchises in all of sports and, it being in the Mecca in New York. So definitely enjoyed every single second of it and grateful, worked very hard to get here and, grateful and definitely enjoying the ride. So, just like everyone else and all my colleagues and yourself and all everyone covering the Mets and creating content, everyone is passionate about it and grinds and works hard, and it's nice to see it pay off in my corner and then in other corners for other individuals as well.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't have said it better. It's been awesome getting to follow you and getting to know you now a bit. So now that we're going to start getting into the conversation a lot with the Mets and the MLB, really want to touch on the lockout too, especially what you've been hearing at least to this point as someone that has been connected with fellow people across the MLB. But I do just want to address one donation here in the chat. Thank you so much, Mets Nation. Any of the final three I'm good with regarding the Mets manager search right now. Awesome. Appreciate the donation, my friend. Again, everyone, please make sure to check out Pat in the description down below. You can check out his Twitter and also all of his pieces that he has an affiliate with Sports Illustrated. He's been doing a great job there. Even came out with a piece today regarding Kris Bryant that we'll be touching on shortly. Also, another donation here from Felix. Thank you so much for the $5 donation, my friend. It means a lot. It doesn't matter who they hire. I'm excited because I know all three of them would do a great job at managing the Mets. I think so too, and I'm glad to hear that. Pat, I don't know if you saw, but I was going on a big rant a couple minutes ago on just the closed-mindedness with Mets fans with wanting to say they're all in on Buck or they're all in on someone else and how they're kind of setting themselves up for failure. I don't know if you agree or disagree with that one, because naturally I don't like that stance, because at the end of the day, if they say go and hire someone that you weren't expecting or weren't preferring, then you're already giving a negative light on someone when they haven't even gotten the chance of proving themselves. And I think Billy Epler is a prime example on that. And look what he's done in his first month as a GM. So you'd like to expand on that. Go ahead.
Yeah, so that's a good point. I mean, everyone falls in love with experience, and sometimes it's hard not to. I mean, the Mets are about to hire their fourth manager in the last 5 years, so they got to get it right this time, and they've gone with a couple, candidates who have lacked experience in the last few years, and they're obviously not dead set on it, since two of the three finalists have never managed in the big leagues before, and Joe Espada and Matt Quacharo, who I also think would be very good candidates, especially Espada, who he's been the bench coach for the Astros for the last 4 years under AJ Hinch for 2 years, and then Dusty Baker the last 2 seasons. And I think Espada is looked at as potentially, maybe being the next Alex Cora. And I'm not sure how much of that pertains to him being his successor in Houston as the bench coach, but obviously he's an attractive candidate, and he's interviewed for the Cubs vacancy in recent years, the San Francisco Giants vacancy before Gabe Kapler got the job. And he also interviewed for the Oakland Athletics vacancy this offseason, and so did Matt Quacharo, actually. And funny thing about Espada, and I learned this from talking to Eduardo Perez last week, but he told me that he knows Espada very well, and he told me that, or he brought it to my attention, I should say, that Espada was drafted and signed by the A's to start his big league career. And like Quacharo was drafted by the Devil Rays at the time in the same year. They both were at the class of 1996. So they both were career minor leaguers, and they've kind of risen through the ranks, as coaches for their respective teams. But yeah, Espada, comes from the A's. So obviously like that looks like a good fit. And then, he's in the running and the finalist for the Mets job. And so is Showalter, and everyone wants the experienced guy. And we hear Max Scherzer saying he prefers Buck Showalter. And as I alluded to, before, I think experience kind of goes hand in hand with, being sure about someone. I mean, Buck has the track record. At the same time, a lot of it kind of it relies on, the roster that the Mets are building. And they've already spent $254 million, on 4 free agents, and they're kind of signaling that they're in win now mode. So I think that there's definitely more moves to be done, which I'm sure we'll talk about, once the lockout's over. But Showalter is going to come in and change the Mets culture right away. And, you heard Aaron Loop and you heard Jeff McNeil say how they lacked that one voice of leadership in the clubhouse. And that's what Buck Showalter brings. So I think that's what really makes him the favorite, along with his 20 years of experience and, of course, experience in New York, which Espada also has. But Buck was, the skipper for the Yankees for 4 seasons in the 90s. And honestly, he didn't get a fair rap with the Yankees, and he didn't get a fair rap with the Diamondbacks, because those were his first 2 big league managing jobs, and he got fired the year before both teams won the World Series. So essentially those teams won with Buck Showalter's teams. But yeah, again, while I do think that Buck's, the favorite and probably the most logical hire, I mean, the other 2 candidates seem like they're rising stars, and a lot of it does come out to, the team that they put on the field and the pitching staff that they build and the depth that they have. And also that the offense lives up to expectations this year as opposed to last year, which we all know that they did not.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And it's really cool to hear that you talked to Eduardo Perez, considering that he was, among the managerial candidates for the Mets just a couple of years ago, how things have changed so much, right? But I really want to touch on for a second, backtracking here, Espada's connection with the A's, because it's interesting to hear that. And also same thing with Cotrero and the Devil Rays, Tampa Bay Rays now, how Espada, when I look at him, I do see a potential next Alex Cora. And I'm trying to be reluctant in saying that, though, too, because I don't want to label someone as, he's for certain going to be this next man up. We have no clue. But I will say that, as I was saying right before you chimed in here, how just in my perception, how I've been viewing things, it does kind of come off as Cotrero would potentially, in my opinion, be the best fit for the Oakland A's if we're basing things on not just experience, but how exactly they develop. Cotrero, even though that he doesn't necessarily have big market experience, he doesn't need that with the A's, and also being with the 2 more analytically ingrained teams, not just with the Rays, but also Cleveland before that. He really checks off those boxes as to what I'm sure they'd be looking for in a new manager, but someone that could ride them out in their retool, because they're going to be selling off, I'm sure, once the lockout is lifted, versus Espada, who I'm sure could take the Oakland A's job just fine. But I think he just wants to be a manager regardless on where it is, right? Because he lost out on the Angels originally with Epler. He lost out on the Cubs, lost out on the Giants, lost out. There's one other team I'm missing in there too. Who am I forgetting that he interviewed for? There's one more that he had discussions with. Oh yeah, the Tigers. And then it went to AJ Hinch. So he's been ingrained in 4, now 5, 6, including the A's, over just since 2018. So he's been trying to be a manager for multiple years now. I think he'll take whatever, opportunity is given to him, and that they commit to him. But going back to Buck here, and I'm glad that you brought up how his run has been as a manager, because if you look at his first tenure with the Yankees, especially, to think that was all his fault as to why, he left and they somehow went on that stretch of, winning 4 or 5 years with Torrey. I'm like, you have to look at the Steinbrenner X factor. He had 18 managers hired in his first 18 years, and then Buck was that number 19, right? So by no means was it easy to work under an owner like that. And Buck did a great job at a young age, and he knows how to handle the market. I know that we're decades later. I'm well aware of that. And I do have my natural concerns with him on just the fact of being out of the game for a little bit now as a manager and not having that coaching experience during these past couple of years when the game is continuing to grow. And I still have different worries with Espada and Contreras with their lack of experience, obviously. But all in all, as you kind of touched on, these are all three quality candidates. I'm not against any one of them. I've always been a Joe Espada guy to begin with. I was someone that was very reluctant for Buck Showalter when he was first brought up in these discussions, but my thought process has changed a bit. And more than anything, as I've been reiterating to fans watching the channel or, even on Twitter, how I think we really just need to trust the process on how everything that's transpired for the Mets so far. Like, you need to give them some leash here. I know it's hard because we're Mets fans and, everything always goes wrong for us in every which way. Even when we try to do things right, it just never works out that way. But if we look at the Billy Epler hire again, a lot of people were skeptical. I was very optimistic about him, but I had a lot of friends that were close to me saying that, they didn't like this move. I said, don't judge him on how he did under Artie Moreno. Judge him on how he's going to do with Cohen. We saw what transpired now. So I guess my next thing regarding the manager search now with Buck, you'd have to imagine that if he does become the guy for the job, I view him as someone that's a Dusty Baker type with Houston, right? Where he's not necessarily going to be having nearly as much pull as what you think. Because even Joe Espada, plenty of reports have indicated, has had plenty of say in a lot of decision making for Baker over the past couple of years since he came in as manager there, especially after the Cheen scandal. They just want someone to come in, just like what Buck would now after a lot of disarray the past year or so, come in and really shore up the clubhouse, but also know that they have a great analytics group to begin with, a core that knows how to win, and also are building their player development. So the Mets are trying to get on that path. But I do see a lot of similarities with how the Mets would be valuing Buck, someone that would make sure that he's not overstepping what he can and can't control, similar to what we're seeing now with Dusty.
Well, with Buck, it's funny because he actually was quoted in an article with Baseball Prospectus from back in 2016, mentioning how the managerial role has really changed and evolved over the years to where a lot of it now is about managing personalities in the clubhouse. So
yes,
the Mets have Jacob deGrom, who's a veteran, obviously one of the best pitchers, if not the best pitcher in the world. They now have one of the next best pitchers in the last decade, not named deGrom, Verlander, or Kershaw, in Max Scherzer, who has made it known that he wants Buck Showalter. And the Mets have they have a nice mix now of young players and now veteran position players who they brought in. And then, of course, Scherzer. So, yeah, I think a big thing will be Buck coming in and kind of managing those personalities and making those in-game adjustments and matchup decisions based off what he sees. Because Billy Epler kind of nailed it right on the head in the introductory press conference, the joint one that they held on December 1st before the lockout, which it was after Scherzer's. It was Starling Marte, Eduardo Escobar, and Mark Canha all went together. And Epler was asked about the managerial search during that time. And he mentioned about how analytics and data are going to be used as a roadmap for the manager and the big league coaching staff. But at the same time, the map, when you're going on the hike or out on your venture, it doesn't account for a fallen tree or a fire or a bear, on your pathway. Like, that's up to the manager and up to the coaching staff to kind of make those decisions and, how they see fit. And Buck Showalter has 20 years of doing that. And he's done a good job. I mean, he's not perfect. Like, you look back at the 2016 wild card where he kept his all-star closer, Zach Britton, in the bullpen in extra innings, and they wound up losing to the Blue Jays in the wild card game. But he does have that type of experience, over multiple decades that he can come in and kind of apply what he's learned and how he's seen the game and how he sees it now. And while also, managing the clubhouse, he comes in and he has the respect of the players right away because of his reputation and his track record. And really the only thing for Buck left to do is win a World Series. I mean, he's never managed in a World Series, but to win a ring really would, I think, punch his ticket to the Hall of Fame. And I think that it's definitely one of the reasons why he's hungry at 65 years old to come back into a major league dugout. And I think that's just given the way the Mets have built this roster and kind of being in win now mode right now is kind of why, Buck Showalter kind of makes the most sense for them to hire, at this point. So, yeah, I do think that, with this type of manager, mixed with the roster, I think it kind of is just sort of a good match right now and kind of, why he's seen as the favorite.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that one, especially when it comes to Buck's drive. And that, not to discount the drive that Espada obviously has, you can tell that man really wants to be a manager by now, right? And Contreras, I don't necessarily know exactly how much is there, considering to my knowledge, this is the first time that I've seen him in discussions being manager for a club before. I don't know, if he's been one in the past. I'm just unaware of it. But something with Buck that's interesting too is, if you look at that documentary that I'm sure you watched, as everyone watched, of course, regarding Buck over the past couple of years, is that he thought his time would be done in Baltimore, that he would be done with that, regardless on if they won or not. So to see him come out, it tells you that even at the age of 65, turning 66 in spring, this is an edge, and he's made it abundantly clear how, losses hurt so much more than wins at times. With him getting close, having runs, and I know they only made it past, the AL or NLDS once to actually get to a championship round. But still, for him to be at this point in his career, age-wise, and have this drive, he's obviously, this isn't a money factor. This isn't a trying to, establish themselves. He knows what to do when to come in, and he's going to be adaptive and, fully aware and in constant connection with Billy Epler, Cohen, everyone in front office to just make sure they're on the same page. He knows what he wants. Same thing that Dusty Baker has been wanting. Same thing that, Snicker for the Braves, who finally got it, even though I know he was a first-time manager when he first got hired by them. But these things don't happen overnight, right? A lot of people go throughout their entire careers with either being a really respectable person in front office, manager, or player, and they can't win it all. So if they can get that chance again, he wants to make the most of it. And this really does feel like a match made in heaven in a lot of ways. It should have come to fruition. So again, we're going to see what happens. But as I said before, and I'll say again, I'm going to welcome it with open arms. And I'm excited at the thought of Buck coming in, the same way I'm excited about Cotrero and Espada. And something that I was talking about also, and I'm sure that you could probably agree with this, is the thought of a lateral move with any of the potential people that the Mets interviewed, outside of the pitching coach from the first base coach, from the Dodgers. Do you think that there's any potential in any of these candidates from the 5 or 6 to come in as a bench coach or a different position? Or do you think the way that I do, where it's pretty much unlikely, especially with guys like Cotrero and Espada, because they already have a potential manager spot open with Oakland?
Yeah, no, I definitely see the lateral move as more unlikely. I have seen that actually a lot. I feel like in my replies and on Twitter, fans saying how much they would want Espada or Cotrero to serve as bench coach. But yeah, I just don't see them leaving their current roles for a lateral move at this point. But out of the original, list who the Mets interviewed in the first round last week before they cut the list down to the final 3, Clayton McCullough is the first base coach of the Dodgers. So if the Mets liked him enough, potentially, could wind up offering him the bench coach job. But at the end of the day, it's going to be Buck's decision. I mean, there's collaboration obviously going on with Billy Epler in the front office, but Buck's going to, have his staff and that's who he's going to bring in. I mean, I don't know if he has any prior connection with Clayton McCullough or who else he has in mind, to fill out that staff. But yeah, it's definitely going to be left up to the manager, I believe.
Yeah. I'm glad we're under that same stance too, because people ask me all the time, and I would love to see a Espada or Cotrero in the scenario where they hire Buck to come in behind him. But I'm like, there's just so many reasons as to why I don't see it happening. But before I go any further, I just want to shout out to everyone in the live stream again. If you're watching live on replay, thank you guys so much for being here. Make sure to smash that like and subscribe button. Help us get a 13K subs for the next short-term goal on the channel. Help us get to 300 likes by the end of the stream. Please make sure to check out Pat if you haven't already. Does a great job, a great reporter for the Mets, and a high riser too. You start in June, you said, right?
I did start in June.
That's insane. Yeah, it's insane. Yeah, you're quickly working yourself up the scale. It's been fun. Something I didn't even mention was, I think I actually first found out about you was through Frank. So if you guys don't know, obviously Pat has his own podcast with Frank the Tank, diehard Mets fan, through Barstool. Any kind of, further comments that you want to share on how did that connection start? Have you always known Frank, or was this something that kind of just gelled together because of the Mets connection?
Well, in a way, yeah, it did gel together from the Mets connection. Frank, I connected with 3 years ago while I was still in college in the fall of 2018. And a couple months later, he was looking for a podcast co-host, and I did a test show with him, and then we wound up doing it. And we've been doing it ever since I believe April 2019. So the last almost 3 years now, but 2.5 years plus with Frank. And yeah, definitely the Mets connection, I guess, kind of hits home, between both of us. So we've kind of meshed from there, even though there's a 20-year age difference. But yeah, Frank's the real star of the show. So I'm glad you brought him up.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. One more thing regarding Frank too. I met him once at a game earlier this year. Really, really nice. Very docile too. Not the Frank that you normally see. Of course, what he's known for, and I love his soda reviews. Those are my favorite thing. I got to be honest with you. But one thing on him, how much of his persona would you say is completely genuine, Or do you think he's going off the rails a little bit, obviously, to kind of fit the narrative of him just being this constant hot-headed Mets fan? Because I know that he's got to appeal to, his viewers.
It's 1,000% him.
Okay.
It's not an act. And it's funny because I actually was asked that question earlier today by someone else. And
I think it's a proper question to ask,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
No, it is. And it's 1,000% him. His Mets negative tweeting is him venting his frustrations about the team. And I know a lot of people don't like it. I mean, he goes overboard. Even when they were in first place in the first half, he was still tweeting negatively constantly at night in and night out and blaming Luis Rojas and XYZ. I honestly, like, that's just Frank. Honestly, that's I've gone to a Mets game with him before prior to when I was on the beat, and he's walking through Penn Station at the time, screaming out rants about the Mets just to himself in front of everybody. So yeah, that sums up Frank the Tank.
Okay, well, I'm glad that this is true to who he is, regardless on if we're always in favor or against his stances. I can appreciate the man for being genuine. But Bud, thank you so much for the membership. I really appreciate that. Steven, thank you so much for the membership as well. Appreciate you joining the channel. And Stephen A as well, a great supporter on the channel. Thank you so much for that. Shout out all you guys. Like I said, we'll be getting a question shortly towards the end of the live stream. Buzz Talk $2 donation. Thank you, my friend. If Buck's the choice, who's his bench coach? No clue. I mean, do you have any idea as to who could be a part of his coaching staff? I've heard rumblings about one person. Have you heard anything throughout the MLB right now?
That's a great question. So I haven't heard anything, but one of my colleagues actually put something out there. Brian Butterfield, who could potentially be, on the staff because he was the third base coach actually for the Yankees and Diamondbacks, and is also apparently a respected infield instructor, and that comes from Mike Puma of the New York Post tweeted that out 4 days ago.
I saw that.
Yeah. So that's the only name that I've heard float around, but nothing. Of course, it's final. It's just based off experience and prior working relationship.
Okay. All right. Awesome. So I want to talk about the MLB lockout for a minute. But before I do, I just want to ask you too, as someone that obviously, has always been a diehard Mets fan and now is, intertwined with the Mets, what has kind of, the process been for you being a fan, but also now having interconnections to find out that to actually do breaking news and things like that, like from a fan point of view, how has that entire process been like for you? Has it been something where you're almost, biting on your tongue because maybe you want to say something, but you shouldn't say at this point? Because naturally, as a fan, when you have intel about something, you want to break it right away. You want to share it. So to have all these connections now, how has that, viewpoint been for you as someone that obviously loves the Mets?
Well, I think the number one thing about it, like going from fan to doing this, professionally is, it kind of takes the fan side out of you in a way. It doesn't take the interest out. I'd say that's
Correct.
the number one thing that I've been very interested in the Mets and followed them very closely for a long time. And although I'm not a fan anymore, I'm now doing this professionally for a living, it doesn't eliminate the interest though. So, a lot, you obviously have opinions, but that's just baseball. I mean, whoever you talk to has opinions with what's going on and, what could be done, what they should do moving forward. And it just kind of adds to, the fun of kind of doing these things in scenarios, speculation, and finding out information. And really the number one thing when you are talking to people and finding out information, it's a lot of it's built off trust and relationships. So obviously you have to get permission before you put something out. But, at the same time, like what I've learned, over the course of the past few months, being in this role is, it's not just like you hear something and you put it out there, because now you have the responsibility of credibility and building that, especially at a young age and starting off in the career is everything. So what you put out there, what you say, even if it's an opinion, and not necessarily information, it's important because people are watching, people are reading, and they're absorbing it. So especially when it comes to like breaking news or scoops or whatever it is, like before I put something out there, like I need to be 1,000% sure that it's right. Like for example, the Scherzer thing, like if I hear it from one person, even if I trust them, unless they're in a tip top position where that they're the final confirmation, you're asking around in circles and through connections and seeing who else has heard similar things to you, and usually that's how you confirm things and know that it's credible and you're able to put it out there. Because again, like it's just, you don't want to be known for being wrong. Like it's Jeff Passan actually told me this, and it's a pretty important piece of information, I guess, to live by in this career. It's just like no one will ever remember you, or you want people to remember you, I should say, as always being right, never being wrong. And fortunately, I don't think I've been wrong about anything yet, but If I am, I apologize. But yeah, that's definitely one of my core values, I'd say, of the job is, just being 100% accurate and being credible and being someone who, Mets fans can come to rely on for information and accurate info. And that's the other thing too. Like, I guess coming from being a fan, and although I'm not, necessarily a fan anymore, doing this professionally, like I feel like it's easier for me to connect with Mets fans because I understand where they're coming from, what they're thinking. Obviously, I read it all the time on Twitter, but it's like I come from that, initially. So that I think has helped me kind of, understand the temperature, read the room, and know how to, connect with people and know what they want.
Yeah, I mean, look, we don't want you to be another Bob Nightingale, right? You got to make sure that you have some credibility on your side, and you've done a great job so far. And I completely get what you're saying too, from my standpoint as a content creator, because at the end of the day, there's been numerous instances where I have wanted to say do a discussion or something like that, but I got to make sure that it's not clickbait or something along those lines. Because if I'm doing that, then everyone's going to view, oh, you're not like, I'm not someone that has sources, but I'm someone that loves to share my opinion right away when a report comes out. So naturally, when there are certain reports come out, I have to wait until, say, there are 2, 3, 4 other people that reaffirm that information before I feel it's warranted to have that discussion, or else that I myself am looking in that same boat of someone that is incredible, even though that I shouldn't necessarily be known for credibility. I'm just, of course, not going to clickbait anyone because there's no point. I'd be just as pissed off as any other viewer, that finds themselves searching on the web or anything like that. So great stuff. But I want to ask you now regarding the MLB lockout, what is everything that you know at this point, and really, what is your opinion on what is transpiring right now? It's something that, there's a reason why it hasn't happened since the 90s. I feel like from the stances that we know of, the players union side, and of course the owners, a lot of these disagreements, I feel they shouldn't, in my opinion, and in many, should not be nearly as far apart as what they are. Really, as to what I know Jeff Passan said in an article like multiple years ago, what was it, like 2014, or maybe it was a little after that, said that, we have a war coming for the CBA once it's 2021. So go ahead, share your initial thoughts on all that. And really, when do you think we're going to see a resolution, in your personal opinion right now?
Well, that's a great question. It's the question of the offseason. And
right,
of course, it's halted the hot stove, which everyone loves. And it's going to be like a mad dash as it was prior to the deadline. Now it's going to be like that, after they come to an agreement. So really, up until this point, there hasn't been much traction from everything I've read and heard. But the article, I believe, in The Athletic came out yesterday from Evan Drellich that, MLB and MLBPA were meeting, I believe, today, and they're having some discussions about non-economic core values. But that's the main part of it, and what they're, so far apart on. And that's something that they plan to come to the table in January and start talking about that seriously. And of course, both sides want to play games. They don't want this to cut into spring training, have to, start pushing back spring training games and preparation. And then obviously the worst case scenario would be if it cut into the regular season, because that's when everyone gets paid and, they'd be losing money, the longer they don't play. So each side, that's kind of where I think things will start to heat up, more so in January and early February. And when both sides, I think, will be motivated and, seriously negotiating and getting something done so that it doesn't cut into the, the calendar of games once they start in spring training, when pitchers and catchers report and then position players report. Because in the end of the day, they just want to play the games. And it's unfortunate that we have this so soon after we had the dispute over the COVID season, where the two sides were fighting and then they wound up settling for the 60-game season. And we had to deal with, all those hostile negotiations, and both sides really don't like each other and don't see eye to eye. So yeah, I just hope that this ends sooner rather than later, hopefully January. But I imagine that it's probably going to go into February, and hopefully will not cut into spring training.
Yeah, I mean, that's a concern for me personally. I haven't even thought about the potential, missed games factor nearly as much as I have with just the off season as a whole, because it's such, an important time, not just for fans, for myself that obviously loves covering every step, but especially with this potentially dragging out, it could go, who knows, into spring training, whatever it is. What is your viewpoint on how it's going to impact the market, especially for agents? Because we have big names out there that are still looking for, believe long-term deals, Carlos Correa being at the tippy top of that list. So do you think we are going to be in a situation that many are starting to understand, that we could see guys potentially either staying with their club on a 1-year deal and then seeing what the market will be in the upcoming year, or potentially signing a high AAV but shorter term deal so that way that they are locked up, as something along those lines? So what's kind of your take on all of that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I mean, a lot of it is going to depend on the new luxury tax. So teams will come away, once that's set, teams will come away and see where they're at. And, if they want to exceed or how close they are to, to passing that, the new lugs tax. And of course, it's at 210 mil right now, on the last CBA. So, I mean, the shorter term years and the higher AAV has been a little more common in recent years. And I guess if the market's not there for a guy like Trevor Story or Kris Bryant or whoever it may be, then that's something that I guess I could see, like guys like that maybe taking short-term deals, or maybe like a Carlos Rodon who, comes along with some concerns with his shoulder, some health issues. So it could be a question mark for teams to, lock him up, in the long term. And even last season, you saw with Rodon, he went on or it was preferred rest from the organization to take care of his shoulder. He had shoulder fatigue in August, and he took a little rest. And then when he came back, he didn't go past 5 innings, I don't think, for the rest of the year. So obviously that's a concern, and that's why I don't necessarily see the Mets being in on him once this lockout's over. But guys like Carlos Correa, I still think are going to sign massive deals, and Correa, of course, is going to be looking for money that exceeds Francisco Lindor's 10-year, $341 million contract, and he deserves it. I mean, not only is Correa the best all-around shortstop in the league, but he's one of the top 5 position players, I think, in the league right now, and he just does everything at an above-average level and elite level, I should say. And I think that's someone who we're going to see get a huge deal regardless of what happens with this new CBA.
How much stock do you think teams are or should be putting in regarding the reported issues with Correa's back?
I don't think too much. I think Correa showed us the type of player he is last year. And, he turned down multiple extension offers from the Astros. And like he said, I believe in an interview he did towards the end of the year, that his value now is higher than it was going into last year based off the season he put together. So again, I don't think his back's a huge concern for teams. It's just going to come down to who has the type of cash to dish that out to Correa for the record money that he's going to command on the market. So that's a big one. Like the Yankees, obviously, I think, would be a huge impact move for them to get Correa, but the Yankees are thinking about extending Judge during spring training. And I think that they're saving money and probably will look elsewhere to upgrade their roster next year rather than just, backing up the Brinks truck to sign Correa.
See, that's a great stance, because the Yankees, I felt, especially with the Tigers out of, position to realistically get Correa with getting Javi. The Yanks seem like a team that can check off those boxes, bring in another big time contract. They did a couple years ago with Garrett Cole. Now they would do it with their star shortstop of the future in Correa. And yes, I know that they have some really good prospects shortstop wise, but if the Yankees find themselves not in on Correa either, where do you think he would potentially go? That's something that I don't know what seems like the best fit for him. I don't see him going to the Dodgers. That's just my stance, at least.
Your guess is as good as mine, because I don't know who's, really in the market for a shortstop and willing to give out that cash right now. There's not many teams that you see. I mean, I think teams like the Mariners are looking at all the big names, and they've been linked to Story and, to Bryant. But Carlos Correa, that's a great question where he's going to wind up. I mean, the best fit right now out of all 30 teams is probably the Astros, but it doesn't seem like they're going to dish out that cash to retain him as they've shown, previously with the lower offers that they've put on the table for him.
Yeah, I don't see Correa going back unless something got so bad with the lockout to the point where he just signed a 1-year deal to stay with them. But again, I think that's very slim to none happening right now. So talking about, Mets rumors and Mets targets as well, let's talk about the guy that you had an article that came out earlier this morning about, originally with Kris Bryant. So fill us in on the latest news with him regarding the San Francisco Giants on if this helps the Mets or it doesn't really change much for them in their potential pursuit for KB.
Well, I think it helps them a little bit. ESPN came out with a story this week that the San Francisco Giants are unlikely to dish out a 9-figure contract to anyone remaining on the free agent market, which pretty much puts them out on retaining Kris Bryant. I didn't really see him going back there, after the season ended, regardless.
Yeah, neither did I.
Acquired him. Yeah, I don't think that was ever really going to happen. And then, of course, as I mentioned, the Mariners are someone who have looked at him and apparently like him a lot. And the Mets, as far as their level of interest, I mean, MLB Network was saying that they were interested in him prior to the lockout once, Javier Baez wound up going to the Tigers. And, the Mets were willing to go as high as 125 mil for Baez, and he wound up, taking more money to go to the Tigers. And Baez, in my opinion, out of the two, between Baez and Bryant, Baez is, was the better fit. Strengthens them up the middle, plays second base, was a star for them in the middle of their lineup down the stretch of the season. And I honestly was a little shocked up until the end I guess that, that Baez wasn't going to be coming back to the Mets, because I thought that that would have been the last remaining piece for them, in their lineup. So, yeah, I mean, Bryant, out of all the agents and executives I talked to around the league, I believe this was on the first day of lockout on December 2nd. Everyone kind of said the same thing. Don't count out Steve Cohen. If he wants Kris Bryant, he's going to get Kris Bryant. He's committed to winning, and he can't be underestimated. So, yeah, in that sense, like if the Mets truly do want Bryant, and Bill Yepler said that they're going to be opportunistic, he didn't really, allude to, that meaning that they're going to make another big splash on the position player side, especially with, holes still on their pitching staff, and, a lot of depth pieces still need to be made. But yeah, I mean, I think if the Mets, feel that Bryant, or maybe they could get Bryant on a shorter term deal with high AAV, that maybe they do it, because it would essentially transform them into a juggernaut on offense. Now, I don't think Bryant fits as much defensively. I mean, third base is his natural position, and it would bump Eduardo Escobar over to second, which Escobar said in his introductory press conference that his preference is to play third base. Bryant can also play the outfield, but, even at third base and in the outfield, he's not necessarily, known for his defense at any of the positions he plays. Billy Epler also said it too, prior to the lockout, that he loves players who can play infield and outfield. So that also is where Bryant fits. But yeah, I don't think that he's great, great match defensively for the Mets. Just obviously his bat in the middle of the order would be good for them. But if they were to sign him, you have to think he would get somewhere between 23 and 25 million a season. And at that point, the Mets payroll would be creeping up on 300 mil, with still another top end starter to probably, go after, and, multiple relievers and a number of depth pieces as well.
Yeah, I see the complete pros and cons to Bryant. And I did a video on him, over the past 2 weeks about it, how I personally feel that he's almost inevitable, at least in the sense of the Mets heavily pursuing him again, because of what you highlight, especially with Epler. Because in my mind, I don't see a world where Javi Baez is not a New York Met right now if Billy Epler wasn't hired. I think that Billy Epler coming in was really a change of viewpoint on how the Mets were evaluating their players, because it was known publicly so much from Sandy Alderson, how much, he absolutely raved about Javi. The only free agent available out of all the Mets free agents that he was really all in on, which is a lot considering the whole thumbs down notion. But again, that goes behind the credibility of Javi really owning up to what he did, his mistake, and just letting his play speak for itself. I think he did everything the best he possibly could to prove as to why you shouldn't judge me on this simple scenario that took place. But also Steve Cohen talking about, I heard him on The Fan saying how much that he has thoroughly enjoyed Baez and would like him back. They had dinner after the season. I guess you shouldn't have dinner with Cohen right after the season like Noah, because maybe it's a little bit of bad luck charm. I don't know. But to see Baez go, I was surprised by that too. They have their reasons, but I really think that Epler coming in and also just reaffirming not just the culture change because of Baez and not necessarily knowing how his personality is going to fit, because I loved him and Lindor together. But there's also a fair argument to be said that maybe because they're best friends and have that close connection, it could also cause some, I don't even know if I should say tension, but just some separation in the clubhouse more than what you should, versus everyone kind of in line and in the same direction. Because I felt that we saw that at points this past season with people having personalities above what they should, But going back to KB, I've actually viewed KB as a potential better fit solely because of his versatility. And I think because of obviously having him at third base, if Brett Beatty is ready over the next year or so, then you could potentially have Beatty there, have KB in the corner outfield, especially with not knowing how injuries are going to arrive. You could have him balancing between potentially him and Marcana, Starling Marte, because obviously all those guys and Brennan Nimmo, we're betting on a lot to hope that they'll be healthy for the entirety of the season, right? So Epler has emphasized, obviously, to not just have depth, but quality depth, something that he struggled with in his first tenure as a GM with the Angels, and trying to reaffirm that we have as much depth as possible, but it's quality depth. Look at the San Francisco Giants, a great example this past year. Guys you wouldn't have even thought of would blossom, but they did in limited roles, and really just great utilization by Gabe Kapler, that overall coaching staff. So to kind of, not contradict what you said about KB, but my stance has just always been for them looking for someone that has that versatility, also has been strong and on base. And yes, the contract won't be pretty. I don't see the Mets going past a 5-year deal. I'd even be a little reluctant to say that they'd feel comfortable going past a 4-year deal for him. But if they could get him on that short-term high AV type scenario, 3-4 years with a Scott Boras client who just did awfully well with Max Scherzer with the Mets, I think those are all valid reasons as to why we could potentially see that connection once again. It's been over a year now. I honestly thought KB was a Met at some point over the amount of times I've talked about him. It really has felt that way over the past year. But yeah, that's just kind of my stance on the matter right now. I won't be surprised in the slightest if he ends up becoming a Met. And if he goes to Seattle, of course, the Mets have their reasons. And I'm sure the main one is not wanting to commit long-term to a bat that is more than likely not going to hit a peak in his career like what he has to this point.
Yeah, well, with Bryant, and the thing I go back to is what they were willing to go with Baez, the 125 million, and maybe there's some ground there to, maybe strike a 5-year, $125 million deal with Bryant if he's willing to accept that. I mean, I know Bryant, or at least what I've heard is that his market is, his market there. It's strong. There's a lot of teams, that were pursuing him, prior to the lockout, but he wants a long-term deal and he wants a lot of money. So it just depends on whether the Mets are willing to commit that type of money to him, when there are other areas still to address. Now, if they are looking at it the same way as Baez, obviously they're two different players, but yeah, that 125 million is kind of what I've been thinking about a lot. If the Mets were to strike a deal with Bryant, and even if they don't, I mean, Jeff McNeil entered the season last year as a career 319 hitter, and he obviously had a down year, as did many of the Mets hitters. And it's not necessarily a player who the Mets will count out after one down season, considering he was an all-star in 2019 and has been, one of the best contact hitters in the game, over the course of his first few years in the league. So the one thing that concerns me was the revelation that, was discovered about the raccoon incident between McNeil and Lindor lacking chemistry up the middle, which is a problem and something that definitely needs to be considered. And also, if they were to sign Bryant and moved Escobar to second base, then that would, potentially playing a player out of his comfortable, out of his natural position of third base, with Escobar already saying that he prefers the hot corner over second, that might not be, something that they want to do. So they did mention they're going to move Escobar around a little bit, but yeah, I think third base will probably be his main position as long as they don't sign Bryant.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one. And I also agree with the notion that it seems like the Mets are going to add at least one more significant bat. How significant, we don't know right now, right? Like, is it going to be someone that has versatility but isn't to the same level as Kris Bryant? I would be somewhat surprised if they went down the trade route, just because of what's out there in the Mets' obvious reluctance to go after someone with giving up top prospects. They don't want to do that. But I do know that in regards to how they would like to approach the starting rotation, that's where the belief is a lot different. Where if you're looking at a potential trade route, it seems like that might be even the best route maybe for the Mets to go starting pitching wise. So what's your take on that? I know that you came out with a piece earlier, which I read it and I just thought it was hilarious. Like, we're on the same page, as a lot of people are, with the routes the Mets are going down. As soon as Passan came out with his recent article a couple days ago on the Mets going after both Gausman and Scherzer together, which didn't surprise me, but it was telling that the Mets still want to go out and get another starter that would potentially be an ace or a number 2 on opposing clubs. That would be all the way to the middle of the rotation as a number 3. So I'll go ahead and expand on that.
Interestingly enough, about that Passan report and the Mets wanting Gausman and Scherzer at the same time, that's definitely true. And I know that Gausman, received a higher offer from the Mets than the Blue Jays, but the Blue Jays, he ultimately felt that Toronto was a better opportunity for him to go there and take less money. He still got a very nice deal, 5 years, 110 million. But yeah, it also kind of just shows you how serious the Mets are. I mean, at that point, it paved the way for them to get Scherzer, because at that point they had to, after they kind of, backed themselves in the corner after Gausman, chose Toronto over New York. So they had to get Scherzer, but they were willing to get both of them. And, the Mets have spent $254.5 million on, those first 4 free agents they signed, including Scherzer. And, Gausman would have been an extra 110, 115, 120 plus. So it is telling you that the Mets are willing to continue to spend, that this was not it for them. And when you make these types of moves, I just don't see how you could do it without going all in. So, I'm definitely interested to see what they do, both on the pitching side and on the offensive side after the lockout ends. And you mentioned obviously about, what they're going to do with adding another top end starter, because it seems like they are in need of one in the rotation. As I mentioned earlier in the show, Carlos Rodon is available, but he's probably the last big name available, but he does come along with that injury risk, and the Mets already have DeGrom, who's a question mark because of his elbow. Carlos Carrasco is a question mark, getting a bone spur removed from his elbow. Taijuan Walker hit a wall in the second half. I just think that they need to be more sure about who they're acquiring, and that's why I think trade probably makes the most sense for them, despite having to give up assets and the farm system is weaker right now, and they're looking to build that up and not give up assets. But that's why they could look at a team like the Oakland Athletics, who are looking to cut costs, and they have two quality starting pitchers in the rotation who are both entering their final year of arbitration in Chris Bassett and Sean Manaea. And honestly, I think Manaea probably fits the best. He's a left-hander. He's making $10.2 million next year for the Athletics, and I don't think he would cost much because I think they'd just be looking to dump salary on an expiring contract. And the same goes for Bassett, who's making $8.8 million next season and has one more year on his deal. So it'll be interesting to see what the A's asking price is for that. I mean, the Mets obviously are top heavy, and they have some good players in their top 10 in their farm system, but I don't think that I know for sure that they definitely are not thinking about giving up any of those guys, and they mentioned it before. It also helps that they have 6 top 100 picks in the MLB draft in June, so that'll help them kind of rebuild the farm. But yeah, it just depends on what the A's are asking for, what they're going to have to give up, and I think if the price is low, just looking to dump off salary, that it makes a lot of sense for them to get a Manaea or a Chris Bassett. I know a lot of fans are talking about getting both of them. I think that would cost more, but just landing one of them, I think would stamp their rotation, and it would probably see fit as DeGrom, Scherzer, and then the number 3 would either be Bassett or Sean Manaea, and then Carlos Carrasco and Taijuan Walker. And then I think the Mets are sitting pretty with Tyler McGill and David Peterson as the 6 and 7 who are going to be in AAA. Adam Oller, who is receiving a lot of hype in the Mets farm system, and they got a couple more guys down there, and there's obviously more depth moves to be made because, as I'm sure you remember, and everyone else listening to this remembers, in the summer where the Mets ran out of pitching, they built the depth in the offseason, but they ran out of starting pitching, and Jared Eichhoff, who was throwing a baseball at a fence in Syracuse, had to come back to New York to make a start because they were legitimately out of starters. So obviously that can't happen again, and the Mets do need to make one more move for a big starter, whether it be, most likely to be trade at this point, given that they should probably stay away from Rodon. But yeah, I think that that's the way they need to go while also building depth behind them.
Yeah, no, and that's a great point too about, the Oakland A's, because as we know, to start the offseason, they basically said all reports were that, they're going to be selling. That's why they just let Bob Melvin go to the San Diego Padres. Normally a team isn't going to give up, one of the best managers in the game just like that for no reason. So they're going in this retool/rebuild route. And Sean Manaea, I've always been a big fan of. The guy's got the no-hitter on his resume, like, of course, Carlos Rodon. But I really feel just with all the Oakland A's as a whole, doesn't get nearly enough attention he deserves. Now, he's dealt with some injuries in his career, of course, but he's a big, powerful, Mets love sizable pitchers as it is, but have that towering southpaw in the middle of your rotation really balance things. I would take that over, say, Steven Matz any day of the week. So I was both happy to see Steven Matz go to the Cardinals, and I think that was obviously best fit for the Mets because it really put a fire under Steve Cohen. I don't know exactly how much, but we saw there was something there, right? From the pivot from Steven Matz to Kevin Gausman is quite the jump, if you ask me. That's going from a depth starter to a guy that could easily be an ace on numerous teams right now in the league. But going back to Manaea quick, Manaea or Bassett, I think Manaea makes the most sense, not just because of the lefty aspect, but also because of the fact that, he's been a starter his whole career. Chris Bassett, I would love it. If you could get them together, I say do it, even if you have to give up maybe some controllable assets on the roster right now that are, fan favorites, because I know there's a lot of rumblings as to the futures of the Dom Smiths of the world, the JD Davis guys that could contribute to a team like the A's and really be useful, especially if they do lose say Matt Olson. Dom Smith could potentially be your fit at first base. JD Davis, you can use him as a DH or however you want to go about it. So I guess what I'm trying to ask you now is, if the Mets do potentially go down a route with Manaea and or Bassett, does this kind of all feel like an indication that they might emphasize pitching so much like they've been known for this past decade? And in doing so, maybe they don't get another big bat. They get a solid bat, but nothing that's going to be groundbreaking or it's going to hit the papers where I could frame it on the wall behind me, right? Maybe that's the route they want to go down, because it's not easy to check off all those boxes in one offseason, especially a Mets team that's had to do far more than any other club could imagine in one offseason. So what's your take on that, about them potentially prioritizing pitching so heavily? That way it really makes up for the difference if the offense isn't necessarily to a level that fans would hope it would on paper entering the season.
Well, I think that's probably the most realistic route that they're going to go is beefing up that pitching staff, the rotation, the bullpen, and kind of solidifying that so that they have that stability, they have that depth, and they have the production. Because honestly, we saw that Mets team, that lacked offense, hold on to first place for 103 straight days, and it was because of their pitching staff, because they had Jacob deGrom, Marcus Stroman, Taijuan Walker pitching at an all-star level. Their bullpen, was solid in the first half, and I think that, and they also had Aaron Loop, of course. But I think that is definitely something that's going to be a point of emphasis for them. And even like you said, like if they add a solid bat to the mix, along with beefing up their rotation and their bullpen, like I think that probably makes more of an impact rather than, signing Bryant and then not doing as much on the pitching staff. Because if you don't have the pitching, you just have the offense, you're not necessarily going to be, in it at the end or be a contender or hold up throughout a full season. So I think the pitching needs to be a priority. And then, as Billy Epler's been saying, opportunistic on the bats. And I think that's exactly what they will do and how they will be and go about it. Unless obviously they intend on signing Bryant and then, acquiring starting pitching and spending a lot more, which we know they're going to spend a lot, rather than, stand pat after this based off what they've already done. But yeah, I think just the more realistic avenue, unless they go absolutely crazy, which they already kind of have, would be kind of, getting that kind of solid bat to help contribute. And then also, getting a bigger starter and some relievers, because I think that's definitely very important. Important aspect is pitching. And the article I was talking about, Buck Showalter from 2016, he said the same thing, not only just about managing personalities, but also the talent you have on the roster and how they perform, and also having a strong pitching staff is like the number one thing for a contending team. So that's kind of where I see things going. You sort of nailed it on the head.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about the Mets, I always think about a great starting pitching, as long as they're all healthy, right? We think about the rotation from the mid 2010s, and unfortunately, we never really saw it to its full maximum, at least not for the length that we would have hoped as Mets fans, right? But that's always been their driving force. And if you have a strong rotation, you can get anywhere in the end, as long as you get that clutch hitting when it matters most. And I think, the Giants, even though I know that they had a lot of starting pitchers this past season that stepped up, they're just a great example. Had a really good pitching depth throughout the year, had a very strong bullpen. And yeah, when you looked at their offense, they didn't have a lot of groundbreaking names, but they were still able to become the best regular season team in baseball, in part because of just how reliant they were on the pitching, how well it was throughout the year, even though their offense was great in its own right, along with plenty of other teams. But now looking at the Mets, I really view that if this is the route that they're going down, that the trade deadline is what could eventually be, their big splash, just like it was this past year with getting Javi Baez. It seems like that's probably the route that they may be going down, with bolstering that pitching and then evaluating your offense, seeing how you're doing and exactly how much you can upgrade. And they'll obviously be in a spot asset-wise where they can part with some people at the deadline, depending on what rentals are potentially available or whoever it may be. Along with also, I'm not sure exactly, is the draft before or after the trade deadline? Do you know?
Before. The draft is in June.
Okay, so that could be another big factor as well, leading up to the trade deadline too, knowing that the Mets have a huge draft coming up. So as long as they do well on that front, that can very well much have a factor on potential moves that they make at the trade deadline. So would you be in agreement in saying that if they are going to go down a big position player route, while anything's possible once the lockout's lifted, I really could see them going down that same exact route this trade deadline as they did this past year?
Yeah, no, it's possible. And, I think they'd be very fortunate to be in a position where they are buyers at the deadline looking to make a big splash to put them over the top. And the goal should be obviously tooling themselves up in the rest of the remaining of the offseason after the lockout, to be in that position once we get to late July. And that's the big thing. And you mentioned it about, Steven Matz and Kevin Gausman. We talked about it. Like, the Mets have shown willingness that they are willing to spend, and they're willing to, spend big money and outbid all of their competitors. And at the end of the day, it comes down to the player decision. But, money talks above all else. And the Mets are willing to spend, to upgrade their roster, and especially in the pitching department. And again, it tells me that they're not done. And whatever they do, they're going to put themselves in the best position to compete and hopefully be in first place by the time the trade deadline rolls around, and then, be in a position to be buyers and see what they can get and see how they can upgrade their roster from there to, potentially put themselves into the conversation of making it all the way to the World Series.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just need this damn lockout to end because with each passing day, it just makes me miss baseball as a whole and just hoping that the season starts on time, right? But the final topic that I'd like to get in with you before we just answer a couple questions and wrap up this live stream. And again, shout out to everybody if you're watching live or on replay. Thank you guys so much for being here. Help us get a 300 plus likes by the end of the live stream and also help us get a 13K subs. Make sure to please check out Pat Ragazzo, who's doing a great job. Great special guest here on the channel, breaking down all things on the New York Mets. You can check him out and all the links in the description down below. But Pat, let's talk for a second about bullpen, relievers. I just did a video. There are 5 that really come to my mind that I think the Mets very much either should or will for certain be going after once the lockout is lifted. So what are kind of your personal favorites that maybe not just make sense for the Mets, but in your opinion, are the best route for the Mets to go down once the lockout is lifted?
Right. So the loss of Aaron Loop was huge. I mean, he got paid handsomely by the Angels. So, that was obviously a big loss, but, they still have some good pieces in place. And Seth Lugo, he wasn't the Seth Lugo who we've become accustomed to watching coming off elbow surgery last year, but he was still solid. And you have to think that he'll bounce back this upcoming year and kind of get back to that dominant form. But in the meantime, yeah, I mean, losing Loop was a big loss. So there are still some names out there who they could replace him with. I think the biggest name available right now is Kenley Jansen, the Dodgers' longtime closer. And I don't necessarily see them going after him or adding him. Obviously, that would be a big splash and cost some money. But at the same time, Craig Kimbrell might be made available with the White Sox, but he's making $16 million. But then you look at some of the guys who are available who could be realistic for the Mets if they want to, spend on a reliever, which it might cost about $8 million a year if they do go after these 2 guys who I'm thinking of, and that's Ryan Tepera and then the lefty Andrew Chafin, who both had really good years last year for the Cubs, and then of course Tepera went to the White Sox at the trade deadline, and Chafin went to the A's. So I think either or, would be a good decision for the Mets. I mean, they obviously need a lefty in their bullpen. It's not as prevalent as it once was, now that we have the 3-batter minimum rule. But
That's
yeah,
true.
I think that, Chafin would make a lot of sense for them. And then there's guys like, Archie Bradley, who's available, who he's not going to cost much. And he was kind of up and down with the Phillies, but it could be, like a secondary move, after, potentially getting a Tepera or a Chafin. And then also Colin McHugh, who used to pitch for the Mets, of course, and he's pitched for the
He's awesome.
Astros the last couple of years, could be a solid move for them to make in their bullpen. And also the veteran lefty Watson. I don't know why I'm drawing a blank on his name, but I think I know who I'm talking about.
Is it Tony?
Tony, it might be Tony Watson, the veteran left-hander.
Yeah.
Yes, Tony Watson. He's a lefty as well. So I think honestly, if they go after Tepera and they wind up landing him, I mean, he could get something maybe like 2 years, 16 mil or something like that. I think he'll be one of the more expensive, relievers who's not a closer left on the market, and then potentially complementing him by bringing in a lefty like Tony Watson, or obviously getting a Colin McHugh and maybe Andrew Chafin, or I think that there's at least 2 moves for them to be made. I don't think Jarius Familia is going to come back to the Mets at this point, and I think they should probably move on from him. But they still got Trevor May. Drew Smith came into his own last year. Miguel Castro came into his own last year. Edwin Diaz is still kind of a question mark at the closer slot. I mean, he was up and down. He had some good stretches. He had a couple poor stretches. There's been times when high pressure situations where he's almost folded, or he's gotten through it, or he's blown the game. I mean, to fairness to Edwin Diaz, there were a couple of games where his manager and his coaching staff didn't put him in the best position to succeed, where he was facing Jesse Winker in Cincinnati, the Reds' best hitter, and instead of intentionally walking him with first base open and 2 outs, they had him pitch to him and he tied the game, which was a blown save. And also in Miami, where they had him pitch to Brian De La Cruz, who was about, I think, the hottest hitter.
Oh my God. Yeah. I was streaming that game. I was losing my mind when everything was transpiring the way it was.
Yeah. And I think, I'm someone, when I look at a roster, I think that covering yourself as much as possible for injuries and lack of performance is the best way to go in building a roster. So that's why a move like Kenley Jansen would make sense. I don't know that the Mets are going to be serious about, bringing in Jansen. I don't know that he's going to leave the Dodgers, where he spent, I believe, his whole career. But, signing a guy like Jansen and letting him be the closer, it would be to the closer right away, I assume, based off his track record, and having Diaz be a setup man going into his final year of arbitration would probably be the best thing for the Mets. But I'm not sure if they're going to do it. But of course, Edwin Diaz hasn't really necessarily been battle tested to the point of pitching in the postseason and the World Series or, anything like that. And he might get his opportunity this year, but I'm just not so sure that he's the guy and the closer who, could help the Mets, win something of significance. It's just he hasn't necessarily proved that he's able to rise to the occasion, in his young career so far. He's one of the most talented pitchers in the entire league. He's got great stuff. But sometimes, he doesn't get hit around, but he kind of falls apart sometimes. He loses the strike zone or, he blows an important game. So, yeah, I just think that it's kind of interesting to see. It's going to be interesting to see what the Mets do there with the closer position and with the rest of their bullpen. I mean, I think that realistically, maybe Diaz probably will get another year as a closer, the final year of his deal. And then the Mets, strengthen, the chain behind him and getting a Tepera or a Chafin and, adding a secondary piece behind him like Watson or like McHugh or maybe Archie Bradley, as I mentioned. And then, of course, having Lugo and May and Castro and Drew Smith. That makes a pretty good, a solid bullpen unit. So, it's definitely going to be interesting to see what they wind up doing after this lockout.
Yeah, no, again, all great thoughts there, especially on Diaz too, because I find, look, I was in the first row in the game in Pittsburgh where he gave up, the times batting average of 0.30 to Jacob Stallings for the grand slam to lose. So, he's been unlucky. I'm aware of that. He's also had situations where he was put in the right spot and couldn't succeed. So we all know the up and downs that comes with Edwin Diaz. He has all the talent in the world, as you mentioned, though, and I do think he's going to thrive. He just needs to be put in, I shouldn't even say such perfect scenarios, but that comes in. We need some flexibility from him too. He can't be a guy that if he pitches in the eighth, that he's a completely different pitcher. He needs to be on a level where he can be utilized however the Mets wish, with the main belief that he's going to be your closer. So that way, if you do get in a deep playoff run, maybe you do have to change up things a bit. There's a reason why we see starters out of the pen in playoff time. Everything's different in playoffs, right? So we need to find that from Diaz, along with others, of course, respectfully, that they can put themselves in a spot to succeed when it matters most for this team, right? And when I look at reliever options, Andrew Chafin just feels like as good of an Aaron Loop replacement as you can possibly get, given his 1.83 ERA this past year. Times ERA was really strong, and I don't exactly know what his price point would be. I would imagine it'd be similar to Aaron Loop's, at least between $7 and $8 million a year. The reasons for why the Mets let Aaron Loop walk, I'd have to imagine that it was in part of maybe viewing that's a high end for a reliever that they feel confident is not going to put up those same numbers again, or at least close to. Because let's not forget Aaron Loop, who had a very good shorn year in Tampa at a 2 or so ERA. Before that wasn't anything crazy. So I think that his utilization with the Mets, when it was a great year for him, I think it also says a lot about the Mets, not just their pitching staff, but their use of analytics now. Building that analytics department. I think it's easy for people to blow over when you go from having, just interns to 30 plus now. Naturally, you're going to have development of players that maybe you weren't expecting originally, bargain deals or deals with guys in the minor leagues that are going to blossom. And before you know it, the Mets are trying to be in the type of route where they are like the Dodgers, where they are like the Rays, where they're developing guys each and every year that's going to help balance things for them and be able to allocate plenty of money still where they feel it matters most. So the bullpen's really interesting for me because I could see a world where they don't necessarily do anything drastic there because they feel confident in their player development and everything that they're going to do, and really making another Aaron Loop, if you will, right? And I think Andrew Chafin, if they want to go for a guy that solidified himself this year, he's there. Ryan Tepera, same thing. I think Jake Diekman as well from the Oakland A's is a guy that, if he can get his control down a little bit, has plenty of potential too, along with many others. And the one trade route that Mike Puma originally talked about when Aaron Loop first got signed with LA is Taylor Rogers. I would love Rogers in the bullpen. I do think that there is a reluctance to trading for a reliever, especially someone like Rogers who will carry value, even though I know he's arbitration eligible. Naturally, small market teams aren't in love with that. So with that being said, though, I think now's a good time. We'll just wrap up the segment by taking a couple questions before we get out of here. Does that sound good with you?
Yeah, no, it sounds perfect.
Awesome. Again, appreciate you being here. Really means a lot. And shout out everybody again in the live stream. Thank you, guys. We do have some comments for Pat Ray, so we'll get to them here shortly. But Alberto, thank you so much for the $5 donation. Are the Mets sitting in the driver's seat now that the Giants are out of the picture? Have a Merry Christmas, buddy. Merry Christmas to you as well. I mean, I think the Mets are very much in a position where they're going to have success this year. Pat, I think that you feel the same way. They still have more moves that need to be done, but I think that so far this offseason, they've been on a historic pace in a lot of ways, to break open that barrier with Scherzer in itself, to just get a top Scott Boras client, but someone that you can't go wrong with. I'm not one of those people that's under the belief that there's literally any risk here with Max Scherzer. I don't know if you feel the same way or not, but I mean, when you can have a 1-2 punch that can arguably be one of the best in baseball history over a short period of time, naturally, I think that's a good thing, right?
Yeah, no, it's definitely a good thing. And, the number one thing for the Mets, and of course, Marcus Stroman was a free agent, and a lot of fans wanted to see him back. And he's a great number two, but he proved that he's not an ace. And, the thing is with the Mets, given the uncertainty of DeGrom's elbow and if it's going to hold up next year or not, it was important for them to bring in, that type ace caliber pitcher. And that's what they did with Scherzer, because once they lost DeGrom last year, there was no replacing him. But now, if DeGrom gets hurt or if Scherzer gets hurt, if one of them has to miss time, even if it's just a brief 10-day stint and they come back, like, you're covered. Like, you have that ace in the rotation already. You have 1A, 1B in DeGrom and Scherzer. So I think that was definitely a move to be made. And they are a little bit in the driver's seat. I wouldn't say just with Kris Bryant, because his market is pretty heavy. There's a lot of teams interested on him, and maybe someone willing to give him more money than the Mets, which is probably, true at this point. But yeah, no, I think that they're in a very good spot, and did what they could to flip the perception and kind of head into the lockout on a high note.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this changes everything. Just getting, doing that. I think doing that deal with Boris is really going to just open the floodgates for the Mets being involved year in and year out with top free agents that they feel can benefit this team now for both their short-term and a long-term outlook, right? But I do have a comment here for you. This is from Bill. He says, Pat, do you think that they may just agree to extend the CBA 1 year to give a legitimate new deal done?
That's an interesting question, and something I actually haven't thought about. Yeah, I haven't thought about that at all. I mean, maybe if it's, coming close to, cutting into spring training or regular season games, then maybe that's something they would do. But I'm not sure. I think that they're definitely motivated to get something done in the long term now, so that they don't have to go back to the table again anytime soon. And I think every baseball fan is probably hoping the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, look, we all just want baseball to start on time and everything. I would be genuinely surprised if they did like a 1-year extension here and then reevaluate things a year from, because this has been such a long buildup. I don't know why they would just do that personally. Would be against it if it means that we can have the next season be fine, but then you're worrying about the same thing over again the following year. They're not going to just keep pushing and pushing it, right? There's been a lot of build up to this point. But let's see. I do got a couple more questions here. Let's see. Okay, let's see. Eli says, Power Wardy, any chance of Jace Tingler as a coach? What's your stance on him? Because I know that obviously he's no longer with a club currently.
Well, that's a great question, actually. I mean, maybe as a bench coach, but again, it all just kind of comes down to Buck Showalter and who he wants, and if he has a relationship with him, I'm unsure. But there also is a case, I guess, where a manager could look around the league, and even if he doesn't have a relationship with someone, get a recommendation from someone else he knows, or could be like, hey, this is a great baseball guy, and I would like to have him on my bench. But obviously, chemistry and relationship and prior experience has a lot to do with that too. So it's an interesting thought. I'm not sure if there's if there will ever be any traction to that, depending on who they hire as manager.
Yeah, I agree with that one too. Oh wait, someone says Tingler is with Cleveland now. Oh wait, you're right. Did he sign? Twins. Yes. No, you're actually right. I'm almost certain. Yes. Didn't that happen?
Yeah, for the Twins. There you go.
Okay, well there you go. So Jace is out of consideration, because that's actually, I don't know why it blew over my head. I mean, he wasn't the first thing I've been thinking about this offseason, let's be honest. So, but yeah, I remember that happening now though.
They hired him as bench coach on November 8th, it says.
Yeah, makes perfect sense now. Okay. Let's see. Bud says, what's your bet on when we are going to watch games again? I mean, again, we've been talking about this. We don't really, we genuinely have no clue right now. I think that there's a very good chance the season will still start on time. I just think if anything, the build up for the season will be different, especially if we miss spring training games. It might be a slow start to the year, kind of similar to what we had this year with the dead end ball. And then, I'm not going to get on that tangent with the den ball and everything, because I tend to do that a lot. But I do think that we may have a slow start offensively to the year, with players just trying to get back in the groove of things if spring training is delayed.
Yeah, I think right now there's no reason to panic until, we start getting into February. And if there's still no traction on a new CBA, then I think it would be time to get a little nervous. And, how long is this going to linger on? How long is it going to take to, to get a new deal, get some serious traction, and, hope that it doesn't cut into games. But right now, I mean, it's December. We're not even into Christmas yet. And hopefully it ends sooner rather than later, maybe next month. But, again, I don't think it's time to hit the panic button until we get to February.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one too. All right, folks, we'll be taking 2 more questions, and that'll wrap things up. This one from Anthony: could some combo of McNeil, Dom Smith, or JD Davis get a starting pitcher in a trade who has a lot of money left on his deal, like Sonny Gray or Madison Bumgarner? My stance, especially, I think Sonny Gray is someone that could be of interest to the Mets. They showed a certain level of interest in him regarding potential trade packages last offseason. I don't know exactly how much it would hold true nowadays. But Gray, who I think has 2 years left on his contract, could be wrong, 1 or 2 years. I could see him of interest in the Mets. Actually, Sonny Gray profiles quite a bit as someone like Marcus Stroman for me, just performance-wise. So what's your take on that with the Mets using at least 2 or 3, all 3 of those guys as potential trade chip? I think McNeil's most unlikely. I only see McNeil getting dealt if the Mets obviously add another infield acquisition and they can really use him as a core piece of a trade. In that scenario, that would make sense then.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it would take at least Dom and McNeil, if not all 3, to get Sonny Gray. But yeah, the Reds are apparently getting ready to cut costs as well, and they're not going to bring back Castellanos, obviously. And Sonny Gray is owed. He's under contract for 2 more years. He's owed 22 more million across the next 2 years total. So yeah, I mean, if it's looking for to be a salary dump, then I think maybe that it could be possible. But yeah, unless the Mets add another bat, I don't think they're going to trade Dom or McNeil at this point. And obviously they're they'd be selling low with trading those guys, not necessarily for Sonny Gray, but in most trades, I believe, around the league, because teams are going to want prospects as well. And also Sonny Gray wasn't a great fit in New York when he pitched for the Yankees. And I think he'd be the first to tell anyone that he just wasn't necessarily comfortable pitching here. So I'm not sure. I think it's kind of a risk, and I don't necessarily see it happen. And especially now for Bumgarner, given where he's at in his career with injuries, and, he's not the same pitcher that he was, and he is owed a lot of money. So yeah, I don't really necessarily see that, or at least those being the pieces to get pitchers like that.
Yeah, I think that we're in agreement that the Mets can very well go down a trade route for a pitcher. I just don't see Sonny Gray or Madison Bumgarner types as, the most realistic route. Even a guy that we all would love in Luis Castillo. He's going to cost you an arm and a leg. The Mets couldn't even do that when they were trying to get Jose Barrios. Why would it tell you that they could do it for someone that's going to be even more costly, more than likely, right? So, yeah, I agree. I agree with you on that one. So, one more comment before we get out of here, folks. Let's see. This is a good one because I've talked about him before. What about a trade for Kansas City for Whit Merrifield, second base and outfield? I've always loved Whit Merrifield, a guy that has literally been an Iron Man. He plays every single day. I know that he's getting, he's not old, but he's in his early 30s now. But Whit, just an absolute stud, always getting on base, huge defensively in either of those outfield or second base scenarios. But someone that I think is still going to cost you a good amount where the Mets would be reluctant. In my mind, Jeff McNeil is the Mets with Merrifield, so I don't necessarily see the large appeal in them going after someone that has plenty of similarities to someone that they already have in the lineup.
Yeah, I mean, Whit Merrifield, I think he was made available before the trade deadline, but the Royals were fielding calls on him, but they decided they wanted to hang on to him, and he'd be a pretty good player, I think, and a good fit with the Mets given the roster that they currently have. But at the same time, yeah, I mean, McNeil does have a similar skill set when he is playing up to, expectations and to performance, like we've seen in the past. And Billy Epler did say it, as I've said a couple times now on this recording, that, he likes players who can play the infield and the outfield, and that's Merrifield. It just depends on what they'd have to give up for him. It'd probably be too much than what they'd want to, sell off to get a player like that. So, yeah, as you were saying that, I do think that they'd probably just wind up sticking with McNeil if that were the case.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one too. But with that being said, folks, that's going to wrap up the live stream. So I want to thank everyone so much that chimed in this entire time. Before and then after Pat coming in. I hope you guys enjoyed. Please make sure to smash that like and subscribe button whenever you're watching this live or on replay, folks. And please, again, huge round of applause. Huge thank you to Pat for coming on the channel. First time, definitely won't be the last time. Been wanting to collaborate with you for a while now. It's literally, still can't believe that you started in June. I know that you've been new in this, but that's remarkable. So again, I'm wishing you continued success, guys. Please make sure to check out Pat on Twitter if you have him on social media, or his normal articles that he has. through Fan Nation with Sports Illustrated, doing a great job there, covering all things Mets. Breaking news again, most recent report with Max Scherzer and Buck Showalter. That was definitely, I would say that was probably your first. Was that like one of your first like really big ones to be one of the first people to break publicly? Would you say?
That got a lot of attention. That might have got the most attention, but the DeGrom news that he was unlikely to come back, I believe in August, it was I put out there that it was like 99.9%.
Oh yeah, I remember
that he wasn't coming back during the season. And then I did actually break the DJ LeMahieu contract scoop last year, but that obviously got a lot of attention because Jeff Passan credited me in the New York Post and a couple other places. But yeah, I think the Scherzer thing is like the first talk of the town story that I've had. So yeah, hopefully many more. So that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Again, wishing you continued success. Shout out everybody again for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed, and stay tuned for more great content here on WardyNYM as always. So Pat, thank you, my friend, and we'll be talking soon.
Sounds good. Thanks so much for having me. It was a blast.
Yep. Have a great night, guys. Peace out.